Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another Supatease video. And in this one, we're going to be going over my final conclusions when it comes to the performance of the healers moving into Shadowlands on release from the beta. How much has changed? In my mind, this was actually the hardest tier list to sort of go through and think about and construct, because they had been making so many changes to legendaries for these classes, balance tuning overall in the game, that it's become very obscure as to whether or not which healer is ultimately going to reign supreme as the number one. Maybe it will be multiple. I anticipate that each healer is going to have a specific role within the given meta where it's going to excel, and I'm going to be covering all of that as I talk about the specializations one by one. And do note it's a performance tier list on 3v3 Arena, specifically for Shadowlands release. And let's just start. We got Discipline Priest. This is a healer that at the start I would have said was leaps and bounds, infinity and beyond above every other healer at the start of the beta. And you can see that in some of my earlier tier lists constructed here. But I think now it's not as apparent that it's the best. I see a lot of Discipline Priest people where it's, oh, nerfed again, oh, nerfed again, oh, nerfed again, it's going to be awful. But I don't think that's right. I actually think that it's putting it in line with the other healers, and not so much so that you wouldn't want to take a Discipline Priest. I also think that Discipline Priest, being one of the highest consistent damage dealer healers, is going to be very important at the start of this expansion, because hybrids I think are going to be prevalent. So things like Retribution Paladin Warrior with a Discipline Priest, or just any sort of combination of Enhancement Shaman Warrior, these hybrids plus Warrior, or Rogue Mage Priest. It has all of these staple compositions, as well as what I'm expecting to be meta compositions, where it works the best of all of the healers, and it's still really excelling. With Spirit Shell introduced to the Discipline Priest, you can kind of preemptively activate these big shields onto your team. There's a huge amount of outplay factors, tons of returned baseline abilities. It's easily my favorite spec, actually so much so that it is, I'm going to admit it here, it's going to be my main in Shadowlands. I just think that it's so well versed, it's so deep, and I think that it has so many options that there's no doubt that even after you might have seen the tweets, oh, 6% nerf, in PvP, I think that this is still going to be an S tier healer, but it might mean that other healers are up there as well. Holy Paladin, this is the healer where coming off of Battle for Azeroth, you're going to be losing all that borrowed power, and that's where you're going to really feel it. The infusion of light change, so now when you Holy Shot crit, it doesn't make your Holy Light fast. It's going to be still really slow, and you're going to notice that your healing is really slow. I think where Holy Paladin is going to excel is kind of burst damage. And it kind of fits the role of like that aggro cooldown heavy healer. Does it mean that it's as broken as it was at the end of Battle for Azeroth? Absolutely not. So if you're expecting to be God mode crazy Holy Paladin players out there moving over, I don't think that that's going to be the case. But I also don't think it is as bad as a lot of people are saying that it is. A lot of players will basically complain all day long if their healer isn't the best, because then everybody goes after the next healer, right? Everybody just wants to play with the best, and it's understandable, but at the same time, kind of annoying. For me, I think Holy Paladin will have a niche and a place, and I also think that because it has these big, powerful cooldowns at the start of the expansion, I think it's going to be melee heavy. Being able to just trade these big cooldowns and survive the initial burst windows of a lot of teams is going to be very important. So I think it will still work. And it also has the added benefit of concentration aura and the Venthyr 25% interrupt reduction, which at this time I believe stacks. So if you want to run spellcaster cleaves in the future, you can synergize those pretty heavily for massive interrupt reductions. They also have the old school aura mastery returning, which allows them to immune all incoming interrupts for their team. So crowd control setups with Rogue Mage, immuning for your polymorph cast, or just playing with casters. I think that it's still going to be a fun healer. You're just going to have to readjust to Holy Light being really slow. And at the same time, I kind of like it where you need to decide, do I want to go for a slow, efficient heal or a fast, inefficient flash of light? Because in Legion and Battle for Azeroth, healers ended up in a place where you usually just spammed one heal. And you didn't think about it. It was just, yep, I'm spamming Holy Light. I only use Holy Light. So I like that there's a little bit more decision making in the healing. Now, obviously, losing all the borrowed power, and now having to cast mana inefficient heals and have some weaknesses not going to feel good. Like I said, you're not going to feel God mode. But I think that Holy Paladin is a solid healing spec. That's why my B tier for these tier lists is like solid overall, not above average. And I feel confident putting it at B tier. And I think that as a newcomer healer, that you'll like Holy Paladin because it has big healing cooldowns that you're basically invincible, right? So you just need to know, I'll press my healing cooldowns. You're going to get like a minute at least in every game if you've even never played the game before and you're worried about falling over or letting your team die. I think Holy Paladin is good for that, just getting in as a healer and then advancing your skills later on. I think it still has some room to move. I don't think it's going to be as good as some other healers, though. That's why it's just solid, middle of the pack. Holy Priest, this is one that has gone from OMG, meme, really bad, OMG, not sure if it's going to be a meme. It's really hard to say. I've seen opinions of this where people think Holy Priest is the best healer. I just can't see it with the way the meta is at the start. I think that you will struggle with all the melee DPS and hybrids just running you over. That's the major weakness, is surviving when you're attacked. And if it's a bunch of warrior melee cleaves and they're just running at you, I don't think performance-wise it's going to do too well. But later on into the expansion, as you unlock more haste for spellcaster cleaves, Holy Priest was always a monster when it healed double caster. I got a rank 1 in Legion playing with a Holy Priest, Arcane Balance Druid, and I've seen Destruction Elemental, and that's usually where Holy Priest in 3v3 ends up kind of coming online. I think it would be a big risk at the start of the expansion to lock in a Holy Priest because Discipline is just going to be better than you in the Rogue Mage setups. And better than you in the melee cleave setups, and you are really susceptible to just getting tunneled down and trained. But at the same time, it got a lot of reworks to its honor talents, and it's super fun with all the returned abilities. So if you really want to go for it, do it at your own discretion. I think that this is a spec that will get better as gear goes up. And your options to play with more spellcasters goes up, but I'm not sure if I feel confident enough to put it on B tier just because of the meta. I think the meta is not going to be in Holy Priest's favor. I don't think it's a complete failure anymore, especially after the buff to Miracle Worker where your Serenity recharges faster. I think it's a spec you could make work. If you really wanted to be a hipster, you could make it work. It looks like there's a lot of super fun honor talents, like being able to fly up in the air, although whether or not you end up taking that in competitive play, yet to be seen, probably not, but you can fly as a Holy Priest if you want to. I think it's a little bit below average, but it's a lot better than where it was to begin with. It's definitely a lot better, and I think it's a spec that will improve. And then obviously I'll be updating these tier lists as we go along with changes or meta adaptations and figure out if I was right or wrong, because I've played this game for many years. I've seen pretty much every meta this game can offer. I've played every single role in every single class in almost every expansion to some degree, and I've seen the trends of buffs and nerfs and when hybrid healing is this good, what happens afterwards, and I can say that Holy Priest has a few mechanics that typically would make a healer really OP in PvP, but I'm worried about its major weakness, which has always been its weakness of just getting tunneled down, holding it back initially. So go in with your own discretion on the Holy Priest, but I'm going to currently put it as a little bit below average. Right at the start of the expansion, when you're not playing at beta 213 item level with all soulbind conduits and everything at your disposal, I think it's a little bit below average, but if you really wanted to make it work, you could. Mistweaver. This is a healer that also I feel like has varying opinions on whether or not this thing is good or bad. Basically, not much has changed for it. If you want to play a healer that's the same from Battle for Azeroth over into Shadowlands, then stick with Mistweaver because it's basically the same thing. It's a very easy healer to play. If you've watched my tier list on the easiest healers, you're just going to be sitting in the back, chilling with Soothing Mist, maybe roll up for a paralyzed leg sweep with your team. But the major downside for Mistweaver has usually been mages in particular. I'm not sure if we're going to see a ton of them right away just because haste is going to be so low. And also they can play with hybrids that would support them against mages. So things like Enhancement Shaman Warrior, right? It's going to be really annoying as a mage to sheep a Mistweaver through the new honor talent Overwatch for Warrior, Wind Shear, Grounding Totem, all of this off healing from the Enhancement Shaman. I think that it's going to fit really well in that comp specifically and enabling things like Enhancement Shaman to do well, that they'll both kind of shore each other's weaknesses up and make themselves a little bit more competitive. Some people think that it's not going to work at all. A Mistweaver has, since Legion, been the hard counter to damage over time effect classes like Shadow Priest. And Shadow Priest and Ellie Shaman, I said, we're S tier. So you're already pretty much a hard counter to those specs with things like Counteract Magic and your Honor talent pool. And the synergies with things like Enhancement Shaman, if you play that specific composition, Warrior Enhancement Shaman, I feel like it's going to be a good healer. The only major downside is that you're not adding damage really in PvP. With Way of the Crane getting turned into a PvE talent, and the PvE talent having to be balanced around PvE has basically made it null and useless in PvP. So you're not really bringing damage into the thing anymore, and the Eminence Legendary is probably not going to work out because you don't have that original Way of the Crane either. So this is more of a just sit in the back heal and go in for crowd control every once in a while. But I think within the start of the meta that it could do really well. It's a great healer for getting away from melee cleaves. And if it's going to be a melee cleave meta, you can just set up for drinks, play for late game victories with that Enhancement Shaman Warrior. For me, I think Mistweaver is a solid spec. And I think that we're just going to put it on the B tier. I don't think that it's going to be necessarily over excelling, because if it had the old school Way of the Crane and damage, I'd probably almost want to put it on S tier. But because it's lacking that, I think that just it's a solid spec. It's good overall. Resto Druid, this is one that I have a little bit of personal bias towards and a little bit of fear of whether or not it's going to be good or bad. But that was mostly because its legendary got nerfed, but it's still the best one where you Swift Mend, it extends all of your heal over time effects rather than consuming one. The major downside of Resto Druid now is that your Swift Mend will eat a heal over time effect like it used to, and that takes you another global cooldown to get another heal over time effect up. But when you get that to the legendary, you won't need to worry about that anymore. So for me, Resto Druid, I don't know if I want to say that it's as good as Disciplined Priest. The main reason I don't want to say it's as good as Disciplined Priest is because you're not adding damage really. But at the same time, if it's a melee cleave meta, Resto Druid is really good at surviving melee cleave with Bear Form, Travel Form, and all these root talents. I think that it would do well in that meta. It's going to be a healer that I'm anticipating to play with Warlock, Shadow Priest, Ellie Shamans, the Spell Cleave types of comps. I don't think that you're going to compete with Disc Priest for the Rogue Mage healer, at least not at the start of Shadowlands. They're just offering way more to that composition specifically. So I anticipate that its niche is going to be those Spell Cleaves. And at the start, before all the haste is unlocked, before our item levels is as high as it is in the beta, I don't know if the Spell Cleaves are going to work out too well. But when we do get into that meta, I know that Resto Druid will be doing phenomenally well. Do I want to put it on an S tier? I don't think that it's as good as Disciplined Priest, honestly. I think Disciplined Priest is still slightly above, but it's definitely above average. I would not put it on the same tier as a Holy Paladin or a Mistweaver Monk. So for me, at the moment, Resto Druid coming in on the A tier. And finally, we've got Restoration Shaman. This is another healer that got a lot of changes, but I think if you decide to run a Necrolord build, you're going to have a lot of instant healing, which is usually easier to pull off because you don't need to deal with being interrupted. Necrolord basically just going to give you an extra Riptide, and you can avoid casting a lot. I like the mechanics of Water Shield and Mana Tide returning. I love that type of play. I've really enjoyed my time on Restoration Shaman. You have a ton of disruption with Grounding Totem and Wind Shear, but a major downside for the Restoration Shaman is, much like Holy Paladin, you're going to be losing some borrowed power from Battle for Azeroth, things like Pack Spirit that made you invulnerable in Ghost Wolf. So if a melee cleave ever attacked a Resto Shaman in BFA, you're just a complete idiot, because if they had that Azerite trait, you were never going to do more DPS than Ghost Wolf was going to heal them for, just doing nothing basically. So having lost that, and if it's going to be a melee cleave meta, we might see some dying and stun shaman moments. It could be very difficult to survive. So I'm a bit worried about it in that sense. I think that it adds nice damage with Flame Shock and Lava Burst, and the mana cost has been reduced on Flame Shock, so you can actually access it. And having interrupts and purges and groundings is going to fit really well in the aggro. So it's things like Shadow Priest Rogue or Ret Paladin Warrior, I think are going to work well for it. And Resto Shaman, I think, is a healer that can play almost anything. It's going to be a variety healer. It could be a melee cleave, aggro healer, spell cleave healer, mid-ranged healer, playing with melee and ranged. I think that it's a really well-rounded healer, and it's very strong at the moment. Do we want to put it on the S tier? I think it is. I think with the nerfs to Discipline, that Resto Shaman is equal to Discipline Priest at this point. And I think it's going to fit well in the aggro meta, where, again, maybe this is also another justification for Resto Druid to be on A tier, is that it's going to get purged down, and purge is really, really counter to Druid with the way the heal over time effects are going to work now with Necrolord and Adaptive Swarm. So these heavy purge healers that add damage and have cooldowns to survive, I think are going to be the best. That would be my anticipation. So I'm pretty confident putting Resto Shaman up here on the S tier for my healer tier list moving into Shadowlands from the beta. But of course, I would love to hear your opinion as well. If you want to leave that in the comments down below. If you liked the video, leave it with a like. If you like this type of content, then do consider subscribing so you can be notified when I've updated these videos, so you can always stay in the meta. Or if you're returning to the game at any point, you want a little refresher on what's been going on, what's the best, what's underperforming, what's looking like it could be a little bit sleeper. Do note that I'm always trying to give you some valid opinion on the specs themselves, rather than just saying this is C tier, and talk about their strengths, weaknesses, and how I think they'll advance and play throughout the season as well. So if you like this type of content, again, please subscribe. I'll have links to other videos. I have tier lists for easiest healer, best dueler, best battleground. I've got a tier list for pretty much everything. The only thing I don't have is a tier list of all of my tier lists. Maybe that'll happen. When I run out of content, maybe that'll happen. Other than that, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.